Hello and welcome back to the Trinity Lg Football Podcast. I am Dan Albano with OCVarsity and the Orange County Register, and I'm coming to you with our Trinity Lg Podcast here with Scott Barajas, our insider. It is Monday, October 1st, 2018. Scotty, how you doing tonight as we're working our way toward week 7 of the high school season and round 2 in the Trinity League?
Dan, I'm doing pretty well. I got some little OT in with our podcast work. Was kind of breaking down some more game film up until the last minute. So we had all these outcomes. A lot of them were predicted. Some of them had some craziness in them. But it's always fun to follow. I think we had a lot. I think we were good on all our picks.
Yes, we were.
But some were closer than intended. We learned some things about some teams, and some things remain the same. I don't see the second week offering the same marquee matchups on paper, but it's still going to be action-packed and full of intrigue this Friday.
Yeah, round 1 of the Trinity League, all these games, last Friday on September 28th, there was a lot of intrigue and drama and interest from the closer than expected, perhaps, score by Bosco over against JSerra that had people talking. The modern day rivalry game with Servite had people talking. And then one of the games of the year candidate that I was at, fortunate enough to be at, it was a thriller. Came down to the final play. Olu, Santa Margarita. That had people talking. So can round 2 live up to the hype? That's a lot to ask. And like you said, Scotty, on paper, it might be too tall of an order, but that is why they play the games, and you never know what can happen in the Trinity League because there's so much talent out there. But let's see how it goes, because and this will be important because it's going to set the table for next week, which we know is gigantic. So that in itself makes this week important, doesn't it, Scotty?
Oh, it does, because you want to be undefeated at least going into that third week. Some teams will be 1-2. Some teams will be possibly winless. But yeah, you want to be up ahead on the action rather than have to come from behind at the end of the league games.
Right. So modern day St. John Bosco, have to take care of business this week to set up a huge game. The following Friday, October 12th, which will, again, all eyes nationally, California, Orange County will be on, LA County will be on Santa Ana Stadium when Modern Day plays host to Bosco. But that's not till round 3. We still have to get to round 2. We still have to recap our show. So want to thank all the fans again for listening to us, the Trinity Lg Football Podcast. If you're a returning listener, Scotty and I thank you. We're working hard, trying to bring you some detailed insight, sharing some of our passion and enthusiasm for these teams and these players that are providing this entertainment. And if you're a new listener, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And please spread the word about our podcast. Share it on social media. Tell your hardcore football fans. Those are the ones that we're trying to reach. And please listen to us on the way to games. Listen to us afterwards. See how we did on our picks. So, Scotty, let's so just to set the table, we're going to review last week's games. We're going to have our grades for each team, and we're going to have our players of the game for those 3 games. We're also going to have an exciting lower level report this week because there was a big lower level game, a showdown game between those rivals, Modern Day and Servite. And we're also going to be previewing this week's games, all these games coming up on Friday, October 5th. So let's kick off, Scotty, and let's start at the top with the top game of the week last week, billed as St. John Bosco playing host to JSerra, and it was 35-28 victory for the Braves. They won it. That was they improved the Braves to 6-0. 1-0 in the Trinity League, and that was JSerra's first loss. But a couple quick observations. I think this was closer than I thought. I think that George Lonnie had a great game rushing the ball, scored 3 touchdowns. He was a load. He had a highlight run, at least one highlight run I saw, where he was breaking multiple tackles, shedding a tackler with a straight arm on the same play. He was very impressive. Made me look up what offers does this kid have and he's got Boise State and Cal, and the guy's 190, a solid 190 pounds. He's a load. But JSerra's pass defense did very well, held DJ to a 9 for 20 passing outing. So the secondary did well. They had a hard time on the run defense. And Caden Bell did pretty well through 3 touchdown passes. But I think this was, I checked in with Coach Harlow today, and from JSerra, he was confident that his team could play with a team that's ranked number 1 in the nation in some polls. And they proved it, Scotty. What did you think of this game?
Yeah, so, I think it's obvious who you play in the offseason makes a big difference when it comes into these leagues, especially in the Trinity League. I know the question everyone's asking is JSerra that good, or is Bosco not as good as we originally thought? Because we couldn't get a gauge on Bosco with all of these teams that they played.
Right.
So I think it's a combination of both. I think JSerra played up for this one, and they certainly exposed some holes for Bosco. But we'll never know how close JSerra would have came to pull off the win, because it was, I don't know if you saw or not, but there was a huge penalty, a huge turnaround that JSerra was called for. A penalty that JSerra was called for. It was 12 men on the field, giving Bosco first down with 2:49 on the clock, and the runner was running off the field, and the coach said, "Get back on." And that was the 12th man. The kid would have come off, and then JSerra would have had the ball, and they would have had that last drive to see if they could have tied it up. Well, we'll never know. But, they got the flag called on them. But overall, the game was a lot closer. JSerra played as best they could have on the field. And I say on the field because there was another call that resulted in a Bosco score. After capitalizing on a Bosco fumble, JSerra scores to go up 21-14. On the ensuing kickoff with 54 seconds left, they appeared to go for an onside pooch kick. Now, either he meant to do that or he just botched the kick, but Bosco recovered at midfield, and then 2 plays later, DJ hits Bowman for 60 yards down to the 1-yard line. And then 2 plays later, Holani scores with 10 seconds left to tie up 21. So, that was huge. That was a huge call right at the half. But I think the story also of the night was the play of both quarterbacks. You would have thought DJ had the big night. In fact, like he had mentioned, he struggled. He was held to under 50% on the night, and that was partly due to JSerra's pass rush. Specifically, it was coming from Victor Clanton and Jaden Genova, who played one heck of a first half, registering 11 tackles. He had the sack, and then he had a block punt that was key in a scoring drive for JSerra.
Is that Genova or Clanton?
Genova.
Yep.
And then
he was your pick. One of the guys you mentioned mid-season awards.
Yeah, he played a hell of a game, and then Caden Bell, he wasn't spectacular, but he made the throws that counted. He completed some key passes, and most of them were actually backside fades against Trent Duffy and Chris Steele. He was 12 of 21 for 150 yards, and he was only about 57%, but those 3 huge touchdowns. And but the difference overall ended up being the ball control run game for Bosco. They ran for 176 yards of their 245 in the second half, and I think it wore JSerra down a bit. I mean, it was kind of apparent because Genova wasn't getting off in the second half. He, as he did in that first half. I don't think I saw any big plays. He had a couple of tackles, but nothing really big in that second half. And, those Bosco backs were breaking tackles after tackles in that second half, including that one you alluded to with Holani breaking 2 tackles and then that straight arm into the end zone. So, but in all, JSerra, played a really good game, and I don't think they laid it all out on the field.
Yeah, and speaking to a couple of things that you hit on, Scott, in good report here, and we'll get to your grades here and players of the game momentarily. But this was what Coach Harlow said about, to me earlier today. He said, we saw some very good receivers and quarterbacks in our preseason, which I think prepared us for our league. So that's speaking to what you just opened up your report with. And his takeaway is, he says, he says, I'm not sure how this game will affect us. Hopefully the kids now understand if they prepare and focus during the week and believe in what we are doing, that we can play with anyone that we face. All we care about is being 1-0 this Friday. So I guess they were pretty confident, like I said, that they could. That JSerra was confident they could play with the Braves, and they were well prepared, just like you talked about. The one thing I wanted to ask you as well, Scotty, was Harlow mentioned that he felt that they had some misfits, as he put it, on defense with gap integrity. I mean, what do you think he's alluding to? Is what did you see any of that he's talking about, where that they they weren't able to seal? I guess he's saying that they couldn't fill gaps like they needed to.
Yeah. So what happens is they weren't getting off the ball and they weren't filling those holes quick enough, or the linemen weren't freeing up so that the linebackers could come up and fill. So the holes weren't there, and a lot of the times they can't fill. And to their credit, I mean, Bosco they wore JSerra down, and I know, Bosco didn't really start going to the run game until the second half. It's like the whole first half seemed like they tried to throw, and then the second half they started to run. But JSerra is also not really big up. Their backers aren't real big,
right?
And that's also can takes time. It wears down on you. Both Clanton and Genova are probably 210. I mean, Clanton's probably 210, maybe. Genova's probably 200. And I know that when those linemen, it takes a lot out on you, and then the guy kind of was apparent because they weren't as crisp in the second half tackling. So
yeah, well, my takeaway is that JSerra is probably just as good as I thought they were. I got him back at number 2 in Orange County this week. I had him number 3, behind Mission Viejo for that number 2 spot. But I moved them back because, they're within 1 touchdown of Bosco on the road. And I think, they played a, really good non-league schedule, and those wins were legit. And I think JSerra is legit. I think they're going to take care of business against Servite. That's who they want to be 1-0 with this week. I think Bosco's non-league, I think what you kind of hit on, hurt him. And I think, but I also give some credit to JSerra. I think it's a kind of combination of, that kind of soft Braves non-league schedule, and the combination that JSerra is tight. Yeah, they're just a tighter team this year, tighter operation, better defined roles, got a good quarterback. They got receivers. Obviously, putting Tariq Luckett back in the secondary is a major boost, and they're, I guess he's looking like a Pac-12 defensive back, and that's you can't have enough of those running around, especially for JSerra, because we kind of talked about early in the year that was one of their weaknesses. But the thing I also want to ask you, Scott, is that the way it sets up now, and I know this is forecasting a little bit ahead, but like we talked about, modern day Bosco, that game's the 12th. Huge showdown. Everyone's going to point to that as a national, for the number 1 seed for the Division I playoffs. But do you know who modern day plays the following week?
Yeah, they play JSerra.
JSerra. That game, I think, looks a lot more concerning now. That double, I think. I mean, I know, and I know modern day is not thinking this way. But as I'm thinking, man, modern day could be in trouble the following week against JSerra. If JSerra is going to be playing this good, that could be too tall of an order. It really could be.
Well, it was that way last year. It fell out. It was on the schedule like that last year. I think when modern day played JSerra, they were undefeated.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, they didn't play Bosco until after the way how the schedule kind of rotates. I think modern day plays their best games against better competition. I think they have trouble playing to the level of talent if it's down or up. And that's just been modern day's kind of MO. So I don't, they're up for that challenge. I think JSerra is probably more of a rival, believe it or not, with the kids than it is with Servite. So I think that it wouldn't really matter either way. yeah, obviously if you're coming off a loss, yes, that's big. But even if you win and you go down to that next game, it's still going to be huge no matter. And I think they knew that going into the season, that those two games they were highlighted on the schedule. So
yeah, now that Mater Dei JSerra game got a lot more interesting to me because it's that's the 19th. That game's at JSerra. JSerra is going to be seeing a lot of Chris Street, who ran for almost 100 yards against Bosco. So should be interesting. So, Scotty, how about your grades and for both teams, and your who do you got for players of the game?
So my grades, I got Bosco. I gave them a B. Offense and defense, I gave them a B. And then JSerra, I gave them a B on offense, and on defense, I gave them a B. And on my offensive player of the game, I went with Caden Bell for his timely throws. He had a second quarter scoring drive where he hit on 3 consecutive backside shoulder fades, including one to Munar McLean for a score. And I think that was key. Again, he didn't, and he threw a lot of stuff to the backs. I mean, again, I think he threw 2 downfield to Tyler Shimamura, one for a touchdown and then another one. But most of his throws were the fade. But I think he just did enough street. We're saying his same street. I think he had like 96 yards rushing. But he was just kind of methodical. I think he got those tough yards that they needed. And then my defensive player of the game, it's no secret. I think we were Jaden Genova. He had 11 tackles. He had the sack, and then he had the block punt.
Yeah. All right.
And then for Bosco, I went with George Halani.
Right.
He had the 154, 4 touchdowns, 3 rushing, 1 receiving, including that 43-yarder highlight run with breaking 3 tackles and that straight arm to go into the end zone. And then defensively, I went with linebacker Raylan Goreforth. He was constantly around the ball. He made 3 key stops on JSerra to end JSerra drives that resulted in punts.
All right. Good job, Scotty. I agree with those picks, right on the money. Let's talk about another game. The middle game here we'll pick is going to be the Mater Dei 35-0 victory over Servite. This game was at Santa Ana Stadium. So one of the hottest rivalries in Orange County. You had the Servite Asylum. They were the home team. They apparently did. They were apparently very vocal as normal. But Servite struggled to run the ball. Obviously, Mater Dei getting yet another shutout. This is a familiar situation here for Mater Dei, because now they have actually 4 shutouts. They shut out Bishop Gorman 42-0, La Mirada 49-0, and of course St. Mary's of Stockton 56-0. That was the 3 shutouts in a row before they beat IMG. So they got the shutout. I think we expected Braden Hudson Huffman Dixon, the wide receiver, to make who's been a transfer sit out. He's been observing the sit out period as a transfer. He was back in his first game. He caught the first touchdown pass from Bryce Young. So that was important for Mater Dei to get the receiving core going. It was a good ground game for Jacoby Harper. Ran for 104 yards, including on only 9 carries, including a 45-yarder. Sean Dollars ran for 51. And Bryce Young was typically efficient, as he's been very accurate as of late. 15 of 19, 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, not sacked. And he threw touchdowns to Zamora, his former teammate when they were with Cathedral Catholic or Cathedral of LA. And then, of course, we mentioned Huffman Dixon caught a touchdown. But, Servite shut out big time on the passing. They only threw for 70 yards. McKibben was sacked 4 times. And they only ran it for net 20 yards. So there was quite a big difference in yardage here, where Mater Dei is getting 427 yards net yardage, and Servite's coming in with 90. The only thing I can say, that continues to plague the Monarchs is the penalties. 14 for 137. that could be a problematic against Bosco or JSerra or deep in the playoffs. But I think you've mentioned that Bosco struggled with penalties earlier this year, and we know a lot of teams that do. But that's the one thing that's still lingering from Mater Dei. But what was your report on this one, Scotty?
As rivalry games go, anything can happen. And in this one, just about everything happened. It wasn't pretty, as we said. You knew it was going to be an odd night when the officials had to halt play in the waning minutes of the first quarter. They had to halt play because of the Servite Asylum was chanting nonstop, and I guess the officials, didn't want them chanting during the snaps, so they had to chant in between the plays. And then, not surprisingly, both teams were chippy with one another, kind of resulted in a good 20 flags. But that's why I said earlier I was watching I replayed and watched the game earlier, and a lot of those penalties were kind of BS. And I'm looking at that from a non-bystander, from trying to just being a football fan. And I think a lot of them could have warnings rather than be flag happy. And that was just my take, because I've seen other games where they've been more brutal, more flagrant than what we saw in the Servite game. But that was just that's just how I looked at it. And I don't know if writers or how many other people go back and watch the game again and have that luxury to watch the game. But if you watch it, look at those penalties, and I think you guys will all agree with me that they were all kind of they should have been more warnings and not so flag happy. But from a football standpoint, it was a bit of a challenge for the Mater Dei offense. Servite's defense actually had to make them work for the scores. But Mater Dei's defense, you mentioned, posted their fourth shutout of the year. But then, I have to give hats off to Servite's defense, because they probably played the best that I've seen them all year. Even after 35-0 and the running clock that was invoked in the third quarter, that was agreed by Thomas and Rawlinson. The Friars could have folded and packed it in, but, something tells me that Troy Thomas had that, instilled in them in a halftime talk that he wanted them to compete and to the final whistle, because every tackle in the second half, Servite made all 11 hats were around the ball every single time. And when Mater Dei was about to go up 42-0, Sean Dollars makes a spectacular cutback 10-yard run, taking it across the field, thinking he has an easy touchdown. No Servite defenders in sight. He starts slowing down, gets to the end zone, and Zedekiah Sanders is running full speed from the backside, comes running and punches the ball out from behind out of the end zone, which results as a touchback for the Friars. So no score for Mater Dei. It would have been 42-0, but that was a hustle play, and that was just indicative of the odd, weird night that went on for Mater Dei. And after that series, Mater Dei pulled their offensive starters. And on the night, Bryce Young was, like you said, 15, 19, 214, 2 touchdowns, and he had another magician-like 10-yard run, just eluding the rush, juking guys out of their shoes. And then Jacoby added the 104 on 9 carries. And then defensively, you had mentioned they held him to 90 yards, 20 passing, 20 rushing, 70 rushing, and recorded 4 sacks. And then Elias Ricks added his 4th intercept.
Yeah.
And his another pick 6, which would have been his 3rd, but it's just officially his 1st, because the other 2 were nullified on penalties.
Yeah.
But so then another interesting sidebar on the penalties. I actually was talked with the head official briefly on the sideline during a timeout, and he mentioned to me, he said, Mater Dei is so good at what they do, it works against them. And then, as I was about to get an explanation, He had to run back to the game. And so I believe what he was going to say was that it has to do with their physicality that we've all talked about, that being them so physical and so their hits and they're impactful, and just having to slow down what the brunt of the whistle, and they're still blocking and still hitting. And I think a lot of that is what happens. And I've had this conversation with other football fans that have seen this with, like we have talked about in Bosco, and that in another bulletin board forum that was brought up as well from a Bosco side, the same thing. Or how come the officials won't let them play? And I think that's what they kind of have to maybe look on, is that when you look in these big games, you're gonna have to be, smart on the field. I know the kids have to be smart on the field, but you got to let the top dogs, play out. I know when you are the top dog, teams start to bait you, and kids have to be smart, and I know a lot of the modern day kids, like we have talked about, play with the chip on their shoulder because, everybody's coming after them. Even, with all this stuff on and off the field, they just take it onto the field and just play the game. But, it's just something that, we hope that, there's some officiating crews that let them play, and there's some that call it close to the vest. And, obviously, in this officiating crew, believe it or not, was the second time they called a modern day game. They called a modern day game earlier this year. I think it was the Mott game, and I think there were penalties in that one too. So when when I saw that white hat, I was like, here we go again. So anyhow, but that's basically my outtake on this rivalry game. And it's, like I said, I think being Servite and modern day, it's a rivalry game. I think anything learned in this game gets thrown out the door for the following week, because this is its own monster in itself. So,
wow. Well, Scotty, thanks for bringing us as close as you are to the action. You are talking to the officials during the game, and that's pretty insightful. Sounds like some more adjusting that Modern Day has to do, and Bosco perhaps, if it's almost like the NFL players now are talking about how they have to make sure that they attack the ball, and they have to watch where they hit people, how they land on people, and they just have to aim for the ball, and they have to tackle the ball, and I'm sure there's some more adjustments that Modern Day is going to have to continue to make in the penalty area.
Yeah, exactly. That's just basically. I mean, they understand that everyone's gunning for them, so they just have to be smart and make sure that they're being watched, and then they just have to be, and not push after the whistle. That's basically what it comes down to. A lot of these penalties are stupid after the whistle, and they're just jaw-jacking, and they're, who gets the last push in. That's basically what the bad ones are. So, you can't, the holdings and the missed, false starts. I mean, that's just discipline, but the personal fouls, sometimes those are the ones that are, I think the refs gotta is it really, can we give them a warning first? Is it a blatant punch? But,
and just to add on to what you mentioned about the Servite defense impressing you, the second half, was 28-0 at halftime. So Modern Day won the second half 7-0. Of course, it was a running clock in the third quarter. But that's a positive for Servite, allowing only one touchdown. And like you said, also the Friars making the Monarchs work. The first Modern Day drive was 12 plays, 50 yards. That was their most probably demanding type drive. But they also had a 7-play, 80-yard drive and a 7-play, 71-yard drive. So there's some evidence to what you're talking about. Lots of plays. There wasn't like a 1 or 2 play drive. So I guess that's some positives for Servite. Yeah,
they didn't give up the big play. The big play was, I think, Jacoby's 45-yard run, which was a nice cutback run, and then it was also a nice tackle by Cade Fuller, because he actually tracked Jacoby down coming from the other side of the field, and I don't think if he gets him, I think Jacoby scores. So,
all right, another hustle play. And speaking of great plays, I mean, Rick's 78-yard interception return for a touchdown midway through the second quarter. That was a highlight play, too, because he got that off a deflection. But he was right there, and he made an athletic grab. It wasn't like it just landed to him. He wasn't exactly on that man. He was in the area, but he had to really alertly have some great hands. I thought that was a pretty nice play by Elias.
Yeah, like I said, he seems to be right, capitalizing at the right time. But you are right. He had to get around the block and be able to be savvy enough to get the deflection. And he also could have had another one. Him and Koba actually were kind of fighting for Ricks drove on it, and then Koa stepped right in front of it, and they both kind of like, and then, got in the way of it. I mean, actually, if Koa would have caught it, he would have picked it, but Ricks was actually driving on it before before Kobe even made a move on it. So that could have been another one right there too. So.
All right. Well, Scotty, let's get to your grades on this game. How did you come out? Grades on modern day Servite, and then which attracted, by the way, 7,000 fans at Santa Ana Bowl. So that in 2 weeks span, there's been about 18,000 people that have come and watch modern day play live, either against the Friars or IMG. But what were your grades, Scotty, for modern day Servite and your players of the game?
I gave modern day's offense a B+. I gave their defense an A. I gave Servite's offense a C-, and I gave their defense a B-. And my offensive player of the game went with Bryce Young. He was pretty much efficient, catalyst for 214, 2 touchdowns, and then that rushing touchdown. And then my defensive player, I went with Evan Bennett, the nose guard. He had 7 tackles. He had a 1 sack, and then he had 2 tackles for loss. And then my Servite offensive player of the game, I went with lineman Richard Krebs, and he didn't give up a sack, and he went up against Brew a few times, and he kind of held his own. And Brew wasn't, was getting around on him, but Krebs was able to get enough on him not to let him get totally on McKibben, and McKibben, felt that pressure, was able to step up in the pocket, and so hats off to Krebs on that. And then my defensive player of the game, with Cade Fuller, he had 8 tackles. He had that touchdown saving tackle on Jacoby, tracking from behind. So.
All right. Well, good job for the Krebs. Both, like you said, spotlight. That's been, an emotional story. That you meant, that you, with the Krebs, their mother passed away. There's 2 Krebs boys on the Servite. Their mother passed away earlier this season, and so it's been an emotional time. And the Friars have rallied around the Krebs family. So, what a great effort by that kid who's been through a lot. And interesting that you mentioned big number 75 there, Evan Bennett, a good pick, Scotty, because he's a Pac-12 commit, I believe, to Oregon State, right?
Yes, he is. So
4 solo tackles, I believe it was, and 3 unassisted, for a total of 7, which was a team high for the Monarchs. And that's a guy we haven't really talked a lot about so far this year. Interior lineman, right?
Yeah, he's kind of been that, he gets all the dirty work done. His motor is always running. He gets a lot of push, and that's kind of what that nose guard's supposed to do. He's supposed to take up space. You just don't want to get driven off the ball. And even when he does, he makes a lot of tackles from the backside. So he has that motor. He didn't have a lot of tackles, but he's a very active player. So.
Yeah, and Modern Day had a lot of tackles for losses in this game, so it was a great defensive effort. All right, let's close it out, Scotty, as we review our Round 1 games, and we appreciate all the Trinity Lg football fans joining us here as we're recapping Round 1 of the Trinity Lg games. It was Orange Lutheran 39, Santa Margarita 37, total barn burner at Orange Coast College. If you look at my Twitter feed, at OCVarsity Guy, you'll see the winning field goal as time expired on the final play by Logan Loya, a 27-yard field goal. The celebration ensues. So it was a very emotional type victory for Orange Lutheran because, as Scotty recapped and we talked about last week, Orange Lutheran couldn't make a 30-yard field goal to beat Mission Viejo. It wasn't Logan Loya, it was another kicker. So it was a very emotional victory. We're going to close the podcast with some comments from J.P. Presley about, kind of talking about the emotionally, draining week it was, because there was also Kyle Ford lost for the season, a devastating injury. Obviously, definitely the biggest injury so far in the Trinity Lg for any Trinity Lg team has been Kyle Ford out for the year with a knee injury that he suffered against Mission Viejo. That actually, if you listeners to the Trinity Lg podcast, you would have heard Scotty bring that up in his recap last week. That was the first I had heard about it, that Scotty thought he had got injured, and he mentioned it on the Trinity League podcast. It was indeed true. So we feel for Kyle Ford. He's an outstanding receiver and a senior leader. I've written some stuff about him recently about that. So then there, Reggie Strong's out with possibly for the year as well for Orange Lutheran with a neck injury. There was a former Orange Lutheran player who also walked on at TCU who passed away. They had a moment of silence for him. So there was a lot going on in this game. And Santa Margarita played well. It just came down, Scotty, to who had the ball last. That was really as simple as that in terms of it was a total shootout. What did you think about that game, Scotty?
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought for a second straight week, when it had to come down to another Olu field goal attempt, but this time, as you mentioned, they sent out, Logan Loya to make the kick, and I know he had been the kicker the past 2 seasons up until this year. So, I don't know, they gave the kick, didn't allow him to do the kicking duties. So I don't know if he's going to be doing them from here on out. But he's got a live leg, and he's been clutch in those opportunities. So I guess that's probably why they chose to go with him this time. I don't know if Olu would have recovered if they would have lost another heartbreaker. With everything that they've endured. I mean, yeah, they could either go one way or the other, but I mean, that's just, everything that they've had to deal with, this season, and then to have, if it would have went the other way, I don't know, how much more a team can take. And then it doesn't get any easier, from here on out, But, as you had said, I didn't see a lot of defense in this one from either team. And I know that's been the case for Santa Margarita all year, because it allowed Helinski to put up huge numbers, 358, 4 touchdowns. He did get picked once. Helinski took advantage of the suspect Eagles secondary. I think he spread the ball around, throwing for a career high 46 attempts, and then completing 24 of 31 passes to Loya and JoJo Hawkins, who combined for 305 of those yards. And that they were going to have to pick up the slack for Ford. But it didn't look like if the Eagles put any pressure on Helinski. I know Schwenke had 1 sack for Santa Margarita, but that was pretty much all I saw that them getting. And then on the Eagles sides, Peter Caselli, tried to match Ryan's numbers. I mean, I think he did a pretty good job completing 64%, 4 touchdowns, 294. And then I think Jake Thomas went down because he only had a few carries, and I don't see him play the rest of the night. And I heard that he's basically either bruised a knee or leg or something like that. So, but I think that they said he should be back, or he's questionable this week, but it didn't seem too serious, but we'll have to see. So they had to go with Nick Barcelos, I guess, who picked up the rushing game, and he had 149 yards. But, like you said, the difference, Dan, was that Olu had the ball last. So.
Yeah, I got an update earlier today from Coach Rich Fisher at Santa Margarita, and they said the early word was it looks like a bruised shin. So what you had heard, Scotty, was correct. Barcelos is a junior, and he looked real impressive. He had 25 carries for a season high, 150 or so yards, and he got a lot of positive yards, and he looked like a really good back. But Jake Thomas has been incredible this year, rushing for over 500 yards, 13 TDs. He's a senior, so it'd be interesting what could Santa Margarita do if they featured both of them more at the same time. There was one exchange, because of the unfamiliarity at the backfield, that hurt Santa Margarita. They did have one fumble going in. I forget, it might have been around the 20, 25-yard line. But I asked Rich if Coach Fisher, Castelli really impressed me, and I was wondering if he considered that like a breakout game. And he mentioned how Peters seems to get better with every game. He threw for 418 yards against Orem, and then just followed up with another great performance against Olu. No interceptions, and as a sophomore, as Coach Fisher said, he's pretty special. I think he is going to be a Pac-12 quarterbacks Pac-12 quarterbacks, is he did not even come close to interceptions, and he runs really well. He can move the pocket, and he looked like he took a giant step. But Helinski was the savvy veteran, led that winning drive for the winning field goal, took his team from the 30 all the way down for the field goal. He actually looked like he was going to throw a winning touchdown to Logan Loya in the final seconds, but it was called back by a penalty, which was a tough call. He almost had the walk-off type throwing touchdown, but Helinski looked unbelievable. And I have to say this, Helinski, he has got the best arm in Orange County. He threw one where he scrambled to his left, probably around his own 25, 30-yard line, and threw it 50 or 60 yards diagonal down the field to a receiver, and the guy unfortunately dropped it. But there's no one in Orange County, and Helinski makes this look easy. Like he could do this all night if he had that. And that's why it's such a devastating loss with Kyle Ford, because he doesn't have that deep threat, 6'3" quarterback. But Helinski, it was unbelievable throw. Unbelievable. I think Steve Fryer mentioned in one of his columns. But now, you got like Logan Loya, who, had 12 catches, and his inside slant stuff, it's pretty hard to stop. And JoJo Hawkins is having a great year. He had 12 catches. But like you said, both these teams struggled to play defense. But it was a gut check victory for Olu, because they needed it. I think that's, if they make the playoffs, it'll be a big part of it was that they beat Santa Margarita in round 1.
Yep, that's the difference. Because like we said, Matt, going into all these Trinity games, Orange Lutheran is probably the only other game they're going to be favored on is against Servite. So, and then that's what happened last year, and Servite kind of got them, and then they ended up being 0-5. So it's, they got the one out of the way, so now they just have to get the others out of the way, and it's going to be tough, but anything can happen.
All right, Scotty, what were your grades in this barn burner of a game, and what were your who were your players of the game?
I gave Olu A- on offense, C- on defense. Santa Margarita, I gave a B+ on offense and a C- on defense. And my offensive player of the game for Olu, I went with Logan Loya, because he had the 12 receptions, the 139 touchdowns, and then he had the game-winning kick.
All right.
My defensive player of the game, I went with Zach Brogdon, who had 15 tackles, 10 solo, and 3 for loss. And for Santa Margarita, I went with Peter Caselli for my offensive player of the game. No intercepts, 64%. He also added a rushing TD. And my defensive player of the game, Blake Bianchini, 9 tackles and 1 intercept.
Yeah, he had a really good leaping interception on one of the throws that Helinski he did float that a little bit on that one. I'm going to add Helinski as my offensive player of the game. No offense to Logan Loya, but I got to give it up to Helinski because he led that game-winning drive without his top receiver. So I'm gonna go add Helinski's name to that. But it was an outstanding game, and certainly wish our best to Kyle Ford in his recovery. He actually got offered by Wisconsin on Friday. So, he's made recruiting trips to Colorado and Washington, and I'm sure the future looks bright for him. Now, Scotty, before we talk about this week's games, let's take a little quick review of some freshman games, because there were some notable ones, and this is kind of where some of the the future lies. But let's start off with this modern-day freshman game against Servite. Servite had come in undefeated. I think they were 6-0, but Mater Dei had a really great defensive effort against Noah Fafita as a freshman, quarterback, well-regarded Servite freshman quarterback, led the Friars to a couple passing league tournament titles, helped them win, I should say, maybe during the summer. But then there was also great Mater Dei defense. Really, I think they had several interceptions, pick 6. And then Josh Hunter, who's played some varsity as a freshman for Mater Dei. He's a kid who had a big kickoff return that set up a touchdown against IMG and is playing some really big moments for Mater Dei. He had a great game. But what did you recall of this game where Mater Dei did defeat Servite 39-21 in the freshman game?
Yeah, so this one was kind of like circled on the calendar for both teams because it was actually both Buckeye coaches. Half the kids were on Servite's team and half were on Mater Dei's. I know everybody has talked about the OC Buckeyes being Servite, but really it's actually, I think there's more kids of the OC Buckeyes on Mater Dei's team than they are on Servite. And so this one was kind of like, kind of for bragging rights, all for fun, but it also was, the funny thing is that everybody had talked about Servite's being their freshman team because Mater Dei doesn't play in these summer tournaments, so nobody really knew what Mater Dei was going to have. But it was an action-packed game. It went back and forth. It was like 20-14 at one point. It was actually 20-14, and then there was a pick six by Cameron Sidney. Yeah. And so that actually gave Mater Dei the lead. Then the next time around, Servite goes out 3-and-out again, and Josh Hunter catches a 15-yard pass, breaking tackles, and that put Mater Dei up 26, I believe 14. And then Servite came right back, scored, so made it 26-21. But then after that, Hunter got another pick six from Noah, and that ended up being the difference, in the game. On a sad note, Mater Dei, Servite did lose their big star receiver T-Mac to a broken collarbone. Like in the first few plays of the game, he caught a slant and got drilled. And then later on in the game, I found out that they lost another slot receiver who was one of their number 19, and he was making all their plays. I guess they found out later he had injured his arm, so I don't know if it sounds like they've lost two of those guys for the remainder of the year. But it was a hard-hitting game. I have to tell you that much. But it was exciting, and Hunter, and Damani Jackson and C.J. Williams did. I mean, those were the dudes that made plays in that game. And for Servite on their side, Noah made some great plays, and I think you'll probably see those guys making more big plays on varsity.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that Noah could be the next wave, next quarterback. Blaze McKimmon, a transfer, is a senior. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to go with Noah next year as their starting quarterback at Servite, but you never know. And guys that you mentioned, like Hunter, is going to be part of that secondary. Damani Jackson more, for sure, because Mater Dei is they're still, believe it or not, pretty young in the secondary, because Elias Ricks and Darion Green, they're juniors. And but then but Cradell, is it Jeremiah Cradell, William Nemo, a couple key safeties. Well, they're seniors, so maybe we'll see if there'll be room. I think there'll be room in the Mater Dei secondary next year for guys like Damani Jackson and Josh Hunter, more playing time than they're already getting. Some of these guys have already got pressed into action because of injuries. Green's been a little dinged up earlier this year. A couple other scores on the freshman level. Round one, St. John Bosco took out JSerra 52-7, and Orange Lutheran beat Santa Margarita 41-0. That was one of the ones that surprises because the Santa Margarita freshmen were undefeated, including a victory over Centennial Corona. But apparently this game was 14-0 Orange Lutheran at halftime. It was actually tight, and then it went sideways for the Eagles, and there was some back and forth plays, some interceptions that were going back and forth, and it just got away from SM. But apparently the Orange Lutheran quarterback and offense is looking pretty good, and we were wondering about how good the Bosco freshmen were. And any thoughts on these games, Scotty?
Just to go back real quick on the final for the Mater Dei game, that was actually I think, what did I have, 39-21 was the final. Santa Margarita, that was kind of a shocker because I think they were undefeated going into that game.
Right.
And so it was kind of surprising. And I know we had talked about both of those squads, but those squads have kind of been more under the radar than the other two programs we've talked about. And then as far as the JSerra Bosco game, that was kind of a shocker because it was 52-7 Bosco, and so that's kind of was surprising. But I know JSerra has 3 kids that are also playing up as well, so I don't think, and one of them actually starts. Teo starts at linebacker now, so I don't think he played in that. I know they have Keon Burnett, the receiver, but he also plays a little bit of defense too, so I don't know if he would have played. So I know they have a lineman, and that's about it. And I know they don't have. I know they do have Damon Williams, their running back, and he did play in that game. I do know that, but it's kind of surprising because we had talked about Bosco being they're also kind of on the radar too. They have some good kids, but nothing that's that made noise like all the other Cert-Right and modern day kids. So it's just. It'll be interesting to see what happens when, Cert-Right modern day play, Bosco coming up.
Yep. Well, that is our lower level report. We're going to try to keep you up to date on those like Scotty said, hard hitting, highly anticipated lower level games. And as we look at these games this week, I guess just keeping with the lower level report. If we just thinking of just the freshmen, based on the results that we just talked about, Scotty, the Orange Lutheran freshmen against St. John Bosco freshmen, maybe that's the game of the watch this week. If we're just talking freshmen.
Yeah, if you're scoreboard watching, yeah, probably. But I guess if Bosco puts up another 50. On Olu and they can't score, then it kind of gives you an idea how large a gap these teams have. So
yep. All right. Well, good job, Scotty, and thank you very much for some more insight on the lower levels of those freshman games. So let's look at the main events, the big boy games coming up Friday, October 5th, and we're going to start with Cert-Right at JSerra. So like we said, Cert-Right 0-1 in Trinity League, 3-2 overall, really playing for their playoff lives after dropping their opener to Mater Dei, taking on JSerra, who is 5-1, but also like Cert-Right 0-1. So Lions just suffered their first loss, looking to bounce back after playing. St. John Bosco so close. They obviously can't get overconfident in how well they played. They got to, somebody needs to, they need to focus, like Coach Harlow said, be 1-0 and get a really important win to get back into this Trinity League race. That's where JSerra's mindset needs to be, in my opinion. Cert-Right, like I said, they're playing for their playoff life. How do you see this game, Scotty, down at JSerra, San Juan?
Yeah, so I think JSerra is going to do what Mater Dei did to Cert-Right defensively. I think they're going to keep the Friars out of the end zone. It's going to be how well does Cert-Right's defense, play, and keep JSerra from packing on the points. The defense, should pretty much, if they end up being the Mater Dei, show up the same defense that showed up for Mater Dei game, and not the defense that they've been playing all year, they may kind of make it a little more interesting. But I just don't see, a lot of people are probably going to, want to, scoreboard compare. And I don't think you do that here because Mater Dei's game was that rivalry game. And like I said, that one could have been easily 42-0 at the same time. But I still think that, JSerra is going to move that ball, and they are going to put probably the same number of points and maybe a little bit more than Mater Dei. But that's also because Mater Dei had that running clock in that second half. But that's why it's hard to do. That's kind of why it's a discrepancy. But I think it's still going to be pretty much kind of the similar aspect of what Mater Dei did to Cert-Right.
one plot twist, and I agree with you. I think JSerra is going to win this game. One plot twist is that Columbia committed JSerra quarterback Caden Bell, first-year starter. Like you said, Scotty was you were pretty high on his clutch, those 3 clutch TDs against St. John Bosco. Well, he's playing against his former team
That's right.
in Servite. So that will be could be some interesting dynamics. He's going to want to play well. Coming off that game where, statistically he kind of outplayed DJ, believe it or not. But he did, from a stats perspective. So a huge game for him. And I think, we'll see where, Coach Harlow talked to us about the gap integrity and stopping the run. And, Servite's going to have to try to get that offense going, because the last 2 games, obviously the shutout against Mater Dei. Hey, it's the number 1 team in the nation. They've shut out a lot of people this year. They're the 4th team. The Friars are the 4th team that the Mater Dei has shut out. But the game before that, Servite only scored 14 against Villa Park in a loss. So they got some work to do offensively. And to win a game with this kind of firepower, they can play some good defense, but they're going to have to score some points. And I just don't know where that Servite offense is going to find that. And dealing with all the firepower of Chris Street, Caden Bell playing well, those receivers. There's some. I guess that JSerra secondary is. It'll be interesting to see how they do again. If they did so well against Bosco. I think the leading receiver for Bosco. I think the most receptions any one receiver had for Bosco against JSerra was 2. They spread it out, but like you said, they only had 9 completions. So that should be interesting to see. And yeah, you're right, Scotty. There'll be some scoreboard watching before for sure. So another game coming up. So that's a 7:00 kickoff at JSerra. Another game. Mater Dei is back at home, taking on Santa Margarita at Santa Ana Stadium. 7:00 kickoff. So like we said, Mater Dei, they're 5-1 overall, including that 1 forfeit. 1-0 in the Trinity League, taking on Santa Margarita, which is 2-4, 0-1. Santa Margarita, again, that same position, fighting for their playoff lives. Coming off that loss, a bitter loss against Orange Lutheran. And for the Eagles, it was tough because like you said, Scotty, how much can Olu take? How much can Santa Margarita take in terms of, they just lost to Orem. They were coming off their bye, but they lost to Orem in their last non-league game, 51-46. They lost by 5. And they also lost to Cherry Creek in a close game by 7. So there's 4 losses by not very much at all. But obviously this is going to be a tough one. And like Scotty, you've chronicled, and the Santa Margarita defense did a little bit better. They did, even though they gave up 350 yards passing to Linsky. It was a shootout type of game. It wasn't as bad as it was against Orem, but now they're facing just an offensive juggernaut in Mater Dei. So it seems like it's gonna be tough. We talked about the Jake Thomas situation. They obviously the Eagles have got to take a card from the Friars playbook and try to keep Mater Dei off the field. And I don't know how. I honestly don't know how they're going to stop, Mater Dei on their defense. I don't know how Santa Margarita is going to stop the Mater Dei offense. But what's your thoughts on this game, Scotty?
Probably the main concern on this, if anything, is going to be it's the game before Bosco.
Good point. Good point.
It is Trinity League, and after seeing, last week Santa Margarita won't go away easily. They're going to keep doing what they've been doing. They're going to be. It'll be interesting with how they attack this, because I know they're strong. The quarterback, but it's going to be interesting because Caselli has not seen a defensive scheme. I mean, it'll probably be a lot like what did Michiviejo do to them? Okay, well now Mater Dei, he's got their secondary, so what's going to be interesting to see what they do, or they try to attack, Mater Dei, run that middle, try to keep Mater Dei's offense off the field, but I think Mater Dei's probably going to keep doing what they've been doing, and last season, Santa Margarita's offense scored the most points on Mater Dei all year in that 70-30 game. But that offense is gone. And Mater Dei's defense hasn't given up over 200 yards passing on the year in any game. So that will be put the test with Caselli. And then can Mater Dei stay focused enough to take care of business, to get to that Bosco matchup, but I think Mater Dei does what they need to do. Again, stay focused, and can, I know this defense is probably going to be hungry because they want that fifth shutout. So I know they're probably thinking that, but I think the Eagles could get a score or two, but probably no more than that. So, but Mater Dei probably, is going to win this one out.
Yeah, I pick a Mater Dei to win decisively. That defense you mentioned, Scotty, they're only allowing 4.8 points for the season on average. That's the Monarchs, by far the lowest in the Trinity League, and racking up the shutouts. And it will be interesting to see. So I was high on Castelli, I still am. I think the Santa Margarita offense line's pretty good. I think they can protect him well, and I think they'll run it. That's a solid offensive line. I think they'll get some ground game. Like I said, I was Barcelos. I was impressed with. I really was, and they have multiple receivers. I will say this: that those Santa Margarita receivers, they caught everything against Orange Lutheran. I was really impressed. Nenad, down the line, they did not drop one pass, and they made some high catches in traffic. Had some yards after catch, and it was really impressive because the previous night I watched Corona Del Mar and Ethan Garbers, who's an outstanding junior quarterback, and I saw a talented receiving core by Corona Del Mar play against Edison, and they dropped 7 passes by Ethan Garbers, who I know is throwing it, is throwing a good fastball, but he's putting the ball in the money, and they could not hold on to it. And but that was not the case with the Eagles. So I don't know if they can do that again against Mater Dei in that secondary, but on that stage. But not a bad unit. They're coming off a really good performance.
Yeah. So that you do make a real great point with that, with them catching everything, because I think this was probably going to be the most polished receiving core that Mater Dei has probably seen so far. Other than, I understand it's IMG had the athletes, but they didn't have a passing offense that that worked well downfield. So, and a lot of the times getting open is half the battle. So if these guys run good routes, and if they do catch everything, that these DBs are going to have to be on their game. So it'd be interesting to see that matchup.
Yeah, you were high on Nenad. He is the real deal. He's a good-looking junior with good size who played physical against Orange Lutheran. We'll see if he can keep that up against Mater Dei. In the rest of the group, they have some experience there, and like I said, they caught everything. And the last game of the night here coming up on Friday, October 5th, and again, we're going to close our show with some comments from their coach, but it's going to be J.P. Presley's Orange Lutheran Lancers going to St. John Bosco. I guess, is this another type trap game? I think Orange Lutheran, they can excel a little bit because, they got that win against Santa Margarita. And, they have a veteran quarterback who really knows his stuff. Got pretty well, got good protection against Santa Margarita. He's going to continue to work with, Logan Loya underneath and short stuff. And JoJo Hawkins is certainly athletic and speedy enough to get open against the Braves. I like that the Lancers started to incorporate Elijah Moharo. They gotta keep using him a ton and flex him out and put him on the outside. He had about 3 or 4 receptions against Santa Margarita, including a touchdown for about 33 yards, maybe just 25 yards. They need to continue to throw him double that as much as they can. He's a two-way player, I understand. I'm not sure what's happening with Ethan Ray. I noticed him, he wasn't targeted. I think he must be doing most of his work on the D-line, subbing in a little bit on offense. But it's and then they need to run the ball. They which I felt like they did a pretty nice job of Olu. We talked a lot about their balance, and I think they ran for over 100 yards against Santa Margarita. They had a pretty nice rotation. Vanderhill's pretty good. Amacio helped out. There wasn't much of Thomas Huff, but they use and it's a lot. It's kind of too much because the one guy you mentioned, Brogdon, Zach Brogdon is one of your players of the game and certainly deserved so. He's great, but there was a couple of times that he was down and we thought maybe he was hurt. He was going to have to come, and he had to come out of the game a little bit. But they're using their linebackers, which are their best defensive guys, really. But they're using Brogdon a lot on running back, and he's a good running back, and he had 4 or 5 carries, but it's a little bit too much to do that in the Trinity League, and especially you saw him, he barely got through that game, and he was a couple times he was slow to get up. He had to come off one time, and we thought he was hurt. I don't think they would be not wise to try to do that again. It's gonna be too much for that young man. So keep him on defense and do what you can do. But I think the Braves are going to win this one. I think the Lancers are outmatched, but it's a mental thing for the Braves. This challenge, same with the Mater Dei Monarchs.
Yeah. So with this one, we mentioned, I think the Braves, come into this one and against Olu in their right mind, they didn't feel like they played their best. Like we said, JSerra was going to, expose some holes for the Braves. And I don't think DJ's going to have another under 50% passing performance. So I think the Lancers are going to have to get pressure on him. But I don't think Olu has a secondary to keep up with the Braves. So it'll be interesting because the linebacking core is going to have to contain that Brave rushing game, as they gave up actually 305 yards last season to Bosco. And, earlier this year, the Lancers did hold another rushing team in check to some extent. When they played Corona Centennial, they limited them to 4.8 yards. They didn't give up a big play. They gave up a lot of rushing yards, but they didn't. Was per carry wasn't that great. Then to counter, you're gonna have to have Helinski. He's gonna have to play better than he did last season. Where he threw for 232 last year. He was at 50%, but he was sacked 6 times. So, he's not going to have 4 this time. But he has Loya and Hawkins who can get open. And I think Olu does use their short passing game well with their quick slants and their outs. The problem is if Helinski has to move in the pocket, he doesn't move very well. That's his Achilles heel. So, he has that big arm, but to counter that, if you get a rush on him, he doesn't. He's pretty much done. So, I think Bosco's going to win this one pretty much like they did last season, and I think they won 42-21 last year.
All right. And I agree with something similar to that. I think decisive victory for Lancers. One thing that Orange Lutheran is doing a lot, and I saw it during Passing League, and I was curious about it. I remember seeing it at the Edison Passing Tournament, but I was watching Helinski roll out and throw. A lot of times, obviously, rolling out to his right as a right-handed quarterback. But he does he does that quite a bit with regularity against Santa Margarita. So he throws well on the run, and he does pretty well on these rollouts. And it's probably to protect him, give a different look, give his receivers some time. But these, I would say. And I didn't chart it, but I want to say, most drives, I would say, maybe except those last drive, but he did that a lot, Scotty. I don't know if you've already seen that on film, but he's rolling a lot out to his right, and I think he looks pretty good doing that.
He does, and to his defense, he has improved on his mobility, but when he is in the pocket and he has to sidestep, he does not move in the pocket very well. So I think they get him out, the sprint outs, to get him a lot more room so he can scan and down. But by no means is he sprinting. It's by design to get him more time.
Yeah.
But the times that I've seen is that he just doesn't. I don't think he doesn't elude the rush very well. And he's a pocket passer. He's got a great arm. We do, and that's by no means that's a knock, but that's just that's his makeup. So
yeah, I hear you. He did have a nice short touchdown run of about 9 yards where he scrambled out of the pocket and hit and kind of barreled over a guy, absorbed a blow at the goal line to score a touchdown. I thought that was a great play as well. So I think he's making some strides, but yeah, but it's hard to have it all, but that's something for them to him to work on and for the Lancers to contend with. So it'll be interesting. We kind of talked about a lot of decisive wins, but we'll see. Scotty, in the Trinity League, you never know. Things might look one way, and we'll see what we're talking about next Monday.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, because none of our, I think none of the, the Olu game and the Santa Margarita game was kind of close. I think the two other games, I think that we had bigger margins of victory for both of those games. So, we'll see how I think, I'm pretty sure it'll be the same as last week. I think we should get them all right, but it's just a matter of the margins and the scores, how close we come into those who also kind of predict out the games.
Yeah, and because we break these games down, there's a lot at stake just by how the teams play. And like we said, I think this is a big one for JSerra to can they because everyone's going to compare that score like you mentioned, Scotty. How well is JSerra going to play against a team that just played Mater Dei? Can Servite get that offense going or not? How's Castelli going to do against a talented secondary? How's Mater Dei going to do with its penalties? Can their defense get that fifth shutout like you mentioned? Can Bosco get DJ going offensively? How the Lancers going to can they string another magical performance together? So there's some intrigue out there, even if they at first glance there's not. We know in the Trinity League we go a little bit deeper. We know there's a lot at stake.
Yeah, exactly, Dan. Exactly.
Well, Scotty, great talking to you once again. Excellent job. I assume that you're going to be back at the Bowl with the friendly confines of Santa Ana Stadium?
Oh, yes, I will, Dan. And I think that's Mater Dei's homecoming. So just FY for everybody.
Should be another big crowd. Of course, they're going to be there again the following week. So, all right, Scotty. Well, hey, you enjoy that game. Great talking to you as always, and good job. And for Scott Barajas, I'm Dan Albano with the OC Register. Thanks for listening to us on the Trinity Lg Football Podcast, and we'll take it out here with some comments from Orange Lutheran coach J.P. Presley. So this is a big character type game if you can get it.
It's a gut check.
Gut check game.
This is,
and that's what you want to establish?
That's exactly who I want to be, is come in with everything stacked against us, everything, because there's so many great lessons that come out of this.
Right.
And I'm just trying to remind this team, man, you get over this, man, we're going to continue to battle. Like, nothing easy, anything easy ain't worth a lick,
That's right, Coach.
That's me.
All right, man.